Have you wondered what student empowerment can look like in a large ensemble? Have you heard the term servant leadership and questioned if that applied to music education? This interview with Dr. Dylan Maddix will answer those questions and more.
Welcome to Pass the Baton, Empowering Students in Music Education. Here, we amplify the voices of music teachers around the world who are passing the baton and creating environments where the music students are empowered. Together, we can help students transform from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. I'm Kathryn Finch.
And I'm Theresa Hoover, and we're so glad to be here with you today. Today's guest was such a fun one, Kathryn. As I said during the interview, I've seen Dylan a couple different times and places over the last few years, and then we both ended up at Arizona State, and it's really neat to see where his work and his research took him.
Mm-hmm. For sure. He's such an interesting person to listen to, and he's funny, and he's just relatable and just really fun to talk to today.
Yeah, it made me think a lot about, the role of the conductor and how we can really, as he says, with servant leadership, serve those who are in front of us. So I think this was such a fun thing to do today. Before we get to the interview, we do want to remind you that you can find show notes right below. If you're in the podcast player, look there. If you're on YouTube, we should have some notes below for you.
Yeah, and if you are, like today's interview, consider showing Pass the Baton some love by subscribing or following, leaving us a review when you listen would be great.
Yeah. And this is exciting. Just this season, we've launched a Buy Me a Coffee site. So if you want to send us some support for less than the cost of a cup of coffee, well, if you get like the fancy coffee.
Yes.
Which of course we do. But if you'd like to go to our Buy Me a Coffee site, you can support us a little bit there, which just helps with the podcast hosting fees and just kind of other things that come into putting this out there. So yeah, let's get to it. Hey, welcome back. We're so glad to be here, and we've got a fun guest today. We are joined by Dr. Dylan Maddix, and I got to say Dr. Dylan, which is super exciting.
Woo! Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what a ring it is to my ego. But yeah. No, I'm trying. I only let other people. I don't introduce myself as Dr. Maddix, but it's nice to hear. And yeah anyway,
I believe it. Well, thanks for being here. This is neat because I think. I got to know you before you knew me when I was listening to your podcast.
Yes, indeed.
The Band Room podcast. And then, we got to meet at Midwest and then spend time together at ASU. So this is pretty cool. So why can you introduce yourself? Tell us like a little bit about your background and what you're up to these days.
Well, first of all, I will thank you and Kathryn for having me. This is my first time out since leaving Arizona. So thank you for getting me. I was going to say out of the house. I'm literally in my house, but it's great to be here. My background is, I think, as most people in our profession, zigzaggy, and it may be different than maybe some people that you talk to in the education world. I started life as a trumpet player. In Summerside, Prince Edward Island, Canada, which is Canada's smallest province on the East Coast, and went through all the band programs. I think as many do. Started in grade 7, had a great junior high band instructor, Peter Gallant, who inspired me and lit that spark. And I knew right away I wanted to be a music teacher, and that changed 1,000 times before I ended up doing what I'm doing. Then I ended up going to, of course, high school after that. And I had another really great educator named Mark Ramsey, who's now Dr. Mark Ramsey and is the head of choral studies at Western University in London, Ontario. And he was such a beautiful conductor and inspired me to do what I'm doing now. I mean, he gave me my earliest opportunities to get on a podium and wave my arms like a maniac, not knowing what I was doing. But it was those kind of moments that really led me to want to be a conductor. So I ended up, following the regular path, went to Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick to do a general Bachelor of Music degree, focused on trumpet, and many opportunities to connect there with great teachers. And then ended up getting a summer opportunity. This is a really long story. Summer opportunity to be an assistant conductor for what is known now as the Dennis Wick Canadian Wind Orchestra, which is one of our two national kind of high school undergraduate honor ensembles, honor bands that we have in Canada. And so I was able to be assistant conductor to Dr. Gillian McKay from the University of Toronto and Dr. Mark Hopkins from Acadia University in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. And this was the moment where I said, I need to do what they're doing. And there was a really strong moment after rehearsal where I said, Dr. McKay, can we go for a walk? I need to ask you a question. And I said, I want to come do my master's in conducting with you at the University of Toronto. And I thought I was so good, as any trumpet player thinks they are. And then she said, no, like, don't even apply. Cause she wanted people who have some teaching chops, and I just out of undergrad. And so she said, come, she knew my path was different. So she said, come do your master's in trumpet performance. So I ended up going to U of T to do my master's in trumpet performance and did all the graduate courses with her in conducting. And that's the same path that she followed. She's probably Canada's #1 conducting pedagogue. And all her degrees are in trumpet, a doctorate from Northwestern in trumpet performance with Vince Chikowitz and stuff. So she saw that in myself, and I kind of followed that path for a little bit. Then taught, sorry, this is getting quite long. And then I taught at Cambrian College in Sudbury. And this was after a career of freelancing as a trumpet player and conductor in Toronto. So yeah, I played with a lot of different things: opera, ballet, brass bands. I was the music consultant for a Netflix show called Umbrella Academy, some Global TV, which is a Canadian channel. It was just a lot of crazy things. And a teaching position came up of this little small junior college, which are very rare here. We don't really have many junior colleges in Canada. So I ended up becoming the head of winds and brass at this school and taught there for 3 years. And I mean, that was probably the biggest education I had in my whole life. I had never taught in a classroom. And here I was teaching upper level music theory. I was teaching wind pedagogy, like wind methods and things like that. And then I brought back the wind ensemble program at that school and taught conducting at Laurentian University, which was also in the city of Sudbury. So I did that. Pandemic hit. And as it did for everyone, I was like, what am I going to do with my life? I knew Jason Kassler as a colleague and as a friend. And then he became director of bands at Arizona State and asked me if I would apply. So I ended up applying to the doctorate program there, and luckily was accepted. It was the only school I applied to for my doctorate. And there's a reason for that, and it's because of him. I mean, we're going to talk quite a lot about some of my research, and he's a pivotal person. He's very different to many directors of bands, especially at large American institutions, where he's one of the most amazing humans I've ever met, who really cares about the people who are in front of him. And to see him teach is someone I would like to emulate whenever I was to get a position. I didn't know when that would happen. So anyway, had a great time in Arizona, besides the heat, and Theresa knows all about that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And now I just moved literally across the continent to the easternly most point of North America, and that's St. John's, Newfoundland. And I'm now teaching at Memorial University. I'm repping my new sweater I just bought yesterday for band camp. And at Memorial, I'm the assistant professor of instrumental conducting and community engagement. So I conduct the wind ensemble. I teach graduate conducting mainly, as well as undergraduate conducting courses, score study, all that fun stuff. And then I have this new role of community engagement. So I supervise a music in the community course, which is a project-based course that students can apply to be a part of whatever their project is, and if funding works out on those kind of things. So it's a very unique position, especially here. Like I said, I'm from Eastern Canada, so it is literally a dream for me to be back and to be able to contribute to an area of Canada that has done so much for me, and to even think that I might help some students who were like me is just a dream come true. And on top of that, this is actually Jason Kassler's old job. So he had this job for 5 years before he was at Arizona State. So it's been great to have him and kind of guiding me not only through the interview stuff, but also now that I'm in the position, and to hear what he did and how things happened. And faculty's amazing, colleagues are amazing. The students I'm beginning to meet, because they're my student assistants this week for Junior Band Week, they've been spectacular, and I'm just really looking forward to the year. So that's kind of where I'm at now, and I'm married to a beautiful person named Kristen Tuchko, who plays the harp, and you might hear that at some point because I think she's downstairs teaching. So we moved with our cat Abby, and and that's all I have to say. There we go.
That's great. Maybe we should title this like "We Love Jason Castler" or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think it's funny that you're wearing your memorial sweatshirt in Canada, and I'm here in Arizona trying not to melt.
Yeah. No, it's perfect. I like this climate fits my wardrobe perfectly. I had to buy so much stuff when I was in Arizona, and I'm not going to wear it ever again.
And that's okay.
Anyway, I digress.
Well, that was great. And it was neat to hear about all of the zigzags. I think a lot of us have gone through that in one element or another,
Yeah.
It's never a straight path.
Yeah.
I think also what I heard, which was, we talk so much on this podcast and with others about relationships. And I feel like I heard through your journey, these people who really made a connection with you and really inspired you to go on. And I feel like, we talk about relationships, but like, that's why, people remember that, what you give them, what you take the time. So anyways, that was great to hear.
And the other thing about these relationships, and so many I talked about in that timeline, I talked about Mount Allison and how I study trumpet. I'm now teaching with my first trumpet professor, Dr. Alan Klaus, who moved to Newfoundland, is teaching at Memorial. And there's moments like that, or now Mark Hopkins at Acadia is now one of my Atlantic Canadian colleagues, and we have the opportunity to collaborate now as colleagues, which is, when I was in grade 7 and he adjudicated me, I never thought that would happen.
Yeah.
So it's funny how we never know how a teacher or whoever's in the room, who's listening, how they're going to impact us throughout our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, today we're going to talk about servant leadership. And so maybe we thought we could start with, what is servant leadership, and where did you get an interest in that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think servant leadership is quite a misunderstood term. Historically, it's as old as time. I mean, it goes back to Aristotle. Biblical Jesus is known as a servant leader. But how, I think, in my research on servant leadership, it comes from the work of Robert K. Greenleaf, and that he was someone who worked a long time and as a kind of a high executive at AT&T. And in the 1970s, or 1970 actually, exactly, he founded this kind of principle, or this philosophy called servant leadership. And he was inspired by a story of Hermann Hesse that talks about this journey where a group of people go on this journey, and they are guided by this servant. I can't remember the name of the servant, but they go on, and the servant does all the regular servant tasks, but he is so happy and full of spirit and guides them. And at some point he disappears. And then this same party of people end up finding this great kingdom, and they meet the leader of this kingdom, and it ends up it's the servant that was guiding them the whole time. So that was kind of the idea that inspired initially Robert K. Greenleaf, the idea that you could be helping people and serving people, but also be a leader in that sense. So the idea of Greenleaf's work is very much other-centered leadership. So first and foremost is focusing on the well-being of what they use. We wouldn't use this word in education, but your followers. And how that is of utmost importance to the servant leader. And that this ideal can be found in many different leadership styles that we know. The thing about servant leadership that makes it different is that we're not doing this because we get this. It comes from, a lot of Greenleaf's kind of proteges talk about servant leadership being like truly in the heart, and it being like a strong foundational a thing for you as a leader, that you genuinely want people to improve as people first. And because of that, they never really talk about it. But because of that, the product does end up becoming better. So especially nowadays, I mean, there's so many corporations that use this model in there, like Starbucks uses it. I think a lot of other ones also are using Greenleaf's idea of servant leadership, and there's been so many books now written on it. But I was reading. Actually, I had no idea of Greenleaf, but Theresa and I had a colleague at ASU, Phil Viejo, who is now Dr. Viejo. Sorry, he's a director of bands at Marshall University, newly appointed in West Virginia, and he's someone who's very strong in his faith and had talked about the word servant leadership, and I was like, oh, what's that? And so that's kind of where I was kind of guided. I think when I first met Theresa, my research was quite super vague, and I wanted to take down the whole like American band system.
That's why we got along.
And it was kind of like how do we define success as band directors was what I was interested in. And then my teacher in Toronto, Jillian McKay, she was like, whoa. So you think you're going to fix everything like by yourself? Like, and my topic was as big as the universe. So she's like, why don't you think about something more positive and like what you can positively add, kind of thing. So through talking to her and through talking to Jason, ended up exploring this idea of who I was as a leader. And it turns out I read this thing by Greenleaf. I was like, this is exactly what I've been looking for, and how I can apply it to conducting. And because I think a lot of educators might use this as well, but I hadn't really thought of it as like, as a university band director, can I be a servant leader? So I was interested to see if there was other people. So I ended up doing a case study for my dissertation, where I interviewed six conductors, not just wind band, but also choral conductors, and also from every level, just to show you that these people exist. Maybe they don't know they're servant leaders, but by the end of our conversation, I think everyone was like, oh, yeah, I am. So yeah, we had a lot of great people. Dr. Rob Taylor from the University of British Columbia, who's director of bands there. Ramona Wiss, who's a very important person in this conversation because she's really the first conductor to ever apply Greenleaf's ideas to conducting. She wrote a fantastic book called The Conductor as Leader. If you don't know about it, I highly recommend it. She's a choral conductor, teaches at Northern, which college is it now? It's in Illinois. I can't remember that, in Naperville. Anyway, but she's great. Some Canadians, Colin Clark, who's a really wonderful colleague and conductor of the Toronto Youth Wind Orchestra. Jonathan Grantham, who is a high school band director in California, and someone who brings his bands every year almost, it seems, to Midwest. So I was interested about that, like how, as someone who gets to that level, who can bring their band to Midwest, how do you lead? Like, are you leading through fear? Are you leading through love? And his reputation is to lead through love. So that's why I was interested in speaking with him, as well as many other people. Jody Blackshaw, who's a composer and educator, and a fantastic human being, and someone who's helped me greatly during my research. And lots of a couple of other people. Oh, Matthew Arau, Upbeat Leadership, is also someone who's I'm really glad I've connected with over the past couple of years, and that our friendship and collegiality continues now. But anyway, so I picked the brains of these people to see about servant leadership, and that's kind of where that kind of lit. And I mean, I can talk more about really, because I think I talked mostly positive, but my real trigger to why I wanted to do this was because I had these wonderful educators growing up, and we achieved such great things. It was never really competition based. We went and did competitions, but it was like, okay, I got this trophy. It's now going in the box. Goodbye. Like I never saw a trophy on a wall ever during my education. So that's never what it was about. But I had those educators, and then, I would end up going on a gig and be yelled at, which is fine. They're paying me. If you want to yell at me, you can do that. But then I started adjudicating, and I would see teachers at these things that would lead through fear. And in my own education coming up, having some university band directors that would lead through fear. And I'm wondering, is this the best way? Is there a way that we can teach and also improve the well-being of the person that we're working with? So I'm so glad that they can play that scale. And I'm really glad that they can figure out how that they can treat the person next to them even better, or how what we do in rehearsal leaves. So that was kind of the real inspiration behind my interest in servant leadership. And then working with, we joked about Jason Kassler, but I mean, he's someone who I think he was one of those people that didn't know that was kind of how he leads. And I mean, he's at Arizona State, one of the best schools for wind ensemble. It's such a storied historical program of excellence. And to hear him rehearse with, these great doctoral students and graduate students and get them to think that the way that they think about, just creatively in a large ensemble and empowerment, which I know we're going to talk about, but he was a real inspiration to my research as well in the servant leadership. But that's just, I don't know if that was a great answer, but a little taste of servant leadership.
Yeah, that's great. And I guess, you had talked about this a little bit, I think it was at the post AMEA gathering, and I'm thinking, okay, servant leadership, this is great. But then what really like the light bulb for me was the podcast that you put out. So, you did the dissertation and then had this podcast where you were interviewing these people, and I could hear it. And it was like, oh my goodness, like everything that you're saying, this is like all of the things that Kathryn and I talk about and get so excited about. And just, that idea that it's not about the conductor. It's about the students and what we can do for them to help them grow as people, as musicians, as leaders, as all the things. Yeah.
And I think one thing, a couple of vital points I forgot to mention. We joked pre-recording that I literally have my dissertation in front of me because I forget what I wrote. But the main reason that I have it here is just because there's a couple of kind of Greenleaf's definitions that are kind of make it what it is. And he has a whole kind of list of attributes that go with servant leadership. And I think one of the other really important characteristics of servant leadership is the importance of looking inwardly. Is the way I'm leading working? Is it working for the people that are leading? Is it working for me? The idea of burnout is a huge topic in servant leadership, because if I'm continually investing into people, what am I investing in myself? And I know I had a conversation with Matthew Rao where he talks a lot about, we need to serve ourselves as well. And talking about, if it's professional development, if it's spending time with your family, if it's, not just overgiving, because once we run out, we run out. We have nothing left to give. But one thing that I want to point out about Greenleaf stuff is he has these questions that you're to ask yourself. About how successful you're being as a servant leader. So they're for yourself, but also for your followers. So the first one is, do those served grow as persons? Second question, do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, and more likely themselves to become servants? And the third question is, what is the effect on the least privileged of society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? So I think these three questions are really kind of we wonder what the gauge is. If this is working, like those are questions that we ask ourselves often as servant leaders. And that hopefully we're asking of our students, of ourselves, which is, that's an answer to another question that we'll talk about. But this idea of ego, which is necessary very much in what we do. So a lot of people don't like servant leadership for that reason, because they have to look inwardly. We have to admit that we did something wrong, or we can do something better. So that's why I really enjoy it. Again, that's just how I've been taught, be it Gillian McKay or Mark Hopkins or Jason. They're all some of the most humble, beautiful people I know, who are always improving themselves. And they're like the top of their game. And they're still like, no, I think I can be a better person. Musician, yeah, always. And I should always say they're beautiful artists, but they really do care about who they are as people. So that's been really great, a great thing to explore about servant leadership. is just to be always looking inwardly, and who I am on the podium is the same person I am right now speaking with you. That's something we talk about all the time as conductors. Just be yourself on the podium. And for so long, I wasn't. Especially when I got to ASU, I was not. I was trying to be my colleagues, and I was not them. And I speak in metaphor. I speak in analogy. My eyebrows go up a lot when I speak. I get excited. So it's like I was trying to be, this is wrong. This is, and that's not who I am. So anyway, so this idea for of Greenleafs has really helped me. So I mean, to a selfish point where it's like, oh, finally, I feel like I can be myself and explore. And I have other things about servant leadership that I can speak about. Like it's not the answer. I'm not a servant leader all the time, and I don't. That's part of the podcast. So those interviews those are actually the interviews that I use for my research. So you hear them all, like every single word. Maybe I cut out an or an ah, but it's all there. And through those conversations, I discovered that context is king or queen. But the idea that who I am in any given moment in a rehearsal, I need a different leadership hat. Because sometimes a note's out of tune, and it's just out of tune. Like I need to adjust it, or I have to be a dictator. Mm-hmm. in those kind of moments sometimes. And I can ask questions, but there's certain moments where time isn't we don't have the time, and I have to do that. What's most important, what I've discovered, is the context of that and how I decide I want to communicate it to my students. Because I can be direct. I love when people say that. I love that conductor because they're so direct. No, it sounds like they're a beep hole, right? I have a button, but I didn't use it.
You could use the button if you want.
But yeah, so because I would always get frustrated by people who say this person's direct, that's why I like them. Well, I know someone who's direct and they're not like a jerk. So those kind of things have been interesting to explore, and to see what parts of leadership are important. So when I try my hardest, I really want to be a servant leader as much as possible. But when you're doing junior band week and they have a concert on Friday and have to sound reasonably okay, I can't be like, well, what does everyone think? We need to go. We need to do some wind patterns. Let's move it. So in those cases, these different hats have been kind of made more apparent to me as a leader on the podium. So that's kind of at right now where the research went, where we're looking more into it. And also the idea of the term servant. It means a great deal different things to different communities. And to me, as a young white man, no problem for me to say the word servant. For a black professor teaching at a primarily white institution, it means a completely different thing. So for me, in my research, I need to look more into that. I need to have those conversations. Is this a conversation even worth having? Does anyone care? But those kind of things are kind of where the research needs to continue. Does servant leadership actually improve the quality of music? I mean, in my life, it has. But quantitatively, qualitatively, does it actually make a difference? So that's kind of where I'm hoping to go with it.
I kind of have two questions. I feel like in the podcast you had there were specific things. Qualities isn't the right word. What am I?
Yeah, the characteristics. So it's funny because I opened right to the page. Amazing. It's funny because in some of the writing of servant leadership scholars, they talk about how this is so different because it's not like a framework that you can just put on. There's not like a 14-step method to follow as a servant leader, but then there is kind of. So a lot of his proteges ended up writing so many books. James Autry is someone. Larry Spears is another one who has written books and has kind of synthesized Greenleaf's essays. It ended up being just his first one was a seminal essay called "The Servant as Leader," which is this thin, and it's a little orange pamphlet. And then that ended up becoming into many more things. But over time, Larry Spears kind of synthesized the topics that Greenleaf was talking about. So yeah, I asked a bunch of questions, and one of them are these servant leadership characteristics as defined by Greenleaf. Mm-hmm. And I used to have the definitions somewhere. I don't know where they are. But anyway, I think you can kind of roughly figure out, or we can even talk about them. So those are listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people, and building community are those Greenleaf characteristics of kind of the areas in which we focus on as a servant leader. But yeah, those were the lists. I'm trying to see if I guess I didn't ever define them.
I won't tell your committee.
It's okay. It's like already in book form and everything.
You've already got the title. It's
Catch me now.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Oh, I found it.
Oh, never mind.
Okay. Very quickly. You're going to have a hard time editing this one, my friends. Okay. So listening, carefully listening and clarifying followers' needs and reflecting on information collected, empathy, acknowledging and accepting unique qualities of people. Healing refers to helping one's own and others to recover from harmful experiences and become whole. Awareness, self-awareness of personal strengths and weaknesses, accomplishments and shortages, and general awareness of issues related to values, power, and ethics. Persuasion, influencing others through persuasion rather than positional authority. Conceptualization, thinking beyond day-to-day operations. Foresight, learning from the past, evaluating current situation, and predicting future outcomes. Stewardship, holding organization in trust, and a commitment to serving the needs of others. Commitment to the growth of people, which is my favorite one. Commitment to nurture the growth of followers, and building community among followers. So there's so many of those that just naturally already kind of lie in what we do as music educators. Like when we talk this idea of healing, at least for me, it not per concert, but at least per year, I'm always trying to program music that in some way we can attach our hearts to. And it's not my story. It's whatever story you want to attach to it, and how that can help heal past hurts and traumas. And especially in Canada, we have lots of this going on with our Indigenous communities and how we collaborate. I know that was one of my interview questions whenever I got to Memorial was how does your research, how does your music programming, how do we collaborate and begin to heal these hurts that were made. So anyway, that's the list and its definitions.
That's awesome. So I guess then the next question would be like, so you mentioned healing just now, but what does it look like as a conductor for an ensemble? Like, what is that kind of bridge for us a little bit, like how we take those characteristics and how they might be applied?
Yeah. And I think this is something I'm really excited about. And I don't know if he'll be okay with me saying it publicly. I'm sure he will. He doesn't really care about much being not shared. But
we can edit if we need to.
Yeah, it will be okay. I'll tell him right after this. And now that means I have to do it too, right? If I say it publicly. But Dr. Viejo texted me while I was still in Arizona, and packing boxes, and he actually called me and he said, since both of us are in these new director of band positions, and we're both starting our career, and it's great, tenure track positions. How about both of us document what we do and how we are servant leaders in these new positions? So that's something that I'm really interested in figuring out how I'm going to do it, because I think I know how I did it when I was at ASU, but I'm interested to see if I can create some structures that people can actually utilize. I guess the first thing for me to think about as being a servant conductor is knowing my ensemble really well. And I mean that on an individual basis. So actually like learning about each individual in my ensemble, and learning about, what are their needs musically, educationally, learning about them in any way I can, so that I can serve them as an educator in that best capacity. So that might be through picking music because I know something about them and that they're okay and comfortable with me, sharing with the group. especially being here in Atlanta, Canada. I mean, where I'm from in Prince Edward Island, it's 75% like Celtic heritage. Um, and, I went to school with one Black person. So what was that like for them to not be seen, to not see themselves in anything? And it's now much more diverse now than when I was growing up. But for me, like for that student, how can I help them? How can I serve them so that they can be seen? So for me, that's one way that I do it. We talk about getting feedback a lot. I think for the servant conductor, it's really vital. So I have, and this is a stolen idea from Jason actually. There's these Google forms that it's kind of a shout out kind of thing. And even at ASU, if someone did something great in rehearsal, you can, send it in and say, hey, that was amazing. Frank did great, blah, blah, blah. But you can also say, hey, Dr. Kassler, you communicated it this way and it didn't really work for me, blah, blah. And it gives a little bit of empowerment and agency to students for them to give an anonymous kind of zero pressure feedback to a conductor. And is it a little bit of a jab to your little ego? Yes, it is. But it's a great way to learn more about how you can serve your students. Always seeking feedback in any way. I did that also when I was teaching at Cambrian College, especially when I was teaching theory because it wasn't really my wheelhouse. So just learning how I could best do it that way. And then the other thing I want to say, and it's maybe not necessarily connected to servant leadership, but I think it's really important, is to understand that the students that are in front of you are, yes, students, but they are artists. They're on that timeline, just like you're on that timeline. And we're a little further down, but they're still artists. So asking them questions and involving them in the rehearsal process is vital. Because I have some kind of vision for how that forte piano crescendo accented release should sound. Classic band. But I know that they have an opinion too. Like even 2 days ago, I went into the intermediate band rehearsal that's conducted by Sarah Comerford, a really great music educator here in St. John's. And she was asking questions and someone's like, oh, I think a crescendo should go here. Like, I mean, a little tiny kid. And it was a great idea. And it was that kind of, I think those kind of giving that opportunity to students and to ensemble members in general, it doesn't have to be a student, is a way that we can be servant conductors. And then also, I guess just lastly, if something's played wrong for, even the fifth time, because the fifth time is kind of when your blood starts to boil, right? It's like, okay, little Timmy. And I caught myself a couple times this week where I was like, that wasn't good. But like, how can I communicate that in a way that is not going to embarrass the student, that is going to uplift them, that is going to inspire them to want to go further than that moment? Because every time we end up teaching, anytime we critique, that is an opportunity to inspire the future. So I think for me, just really making sure that I'm going back to that initial Greenleaf thought and how can I build up this human that's in front of me? And it has very little to do with music. And it has all to do with being a human and all the humanity and that we can bring into the room. So for me, those are just a couple of ways that I think you can start to think about being a servant conductor. And I'm not here to tell you it's easy. It's not. It sucks. Like it does. I'm a great selling point when my book comes out. It'll be like, read it or not, I don't care. It's hard. But it is. You have to look inwardly and you have to listen to people who don't believe in what you're believing. Because so much of the world around us is about results and it's about power and it's about holding on to that power at all costs. And it's about looking strong and it's about those things. That's kind of the world around us. And we often have to be the opposite and say, no, this is what that looks like. This is what being strong looks like. this is what sharing power and wealth looks like in education and in music. So anyway, that I'm getting off my soapbox now.
No, it's also for me like the really, really rewarding part of teaching too, is when you do finally reach that one student that it was hard to get to, or kids make connections and things. Like it's hard. It's also the really, really rewarding part of our job, for sure.
Yeah, I to your point, I started opening boxes today in my office, and I have this hand painted painting of a baton with like acrylic paint. It doesn't even look that good, but it says Flick underneath it. It was when I was teaching conducting at Laurentian. This is the general music education kind of intro to conducting course, but a student came to me emailed me, said, Professor Maddix, are you going to be in your office this time? And it was the day of a test. And I went, oh my goodness. Let me guess, they don't want to do the test or something like that. I said, yeah, I'll be in my office at 2. So come by. And they came by and they, oh, I have a gift for you. And, I had thought the worst, but it was the opposite, which is another point. Anyway, I have this gift for you, and being this painting, they said, turn it over. And I don't say this as a brag, but there was this note on the back, and it said, hello, Professor Maddix. Thank you so much for a great semester. I struggle with depression, and like your class and how you bring joy and lift up people is the only thing that kind of helped me through that. And because of that, I want to be a music educator. So that's something, anytime I question I can't do my job, I flip that puppy over and I'm reading it. And I have, a couple other notes that I always go back to. But yeah, it's those moments where it's like, some people might say, oh, but it's only one life. It's a life. It's a life. And, that I don't think this person's even in music anymore, but if the house burns down, I'm running to grab that.
Yeah.
It's very important. So yeah, it's an amazing thing that we get to do every day. And especially if you want to do it in a way that helps people beyond music, I think is really a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that a lot, that we don't need them all to become musicians and to become, like, I don't know, you probably agree. We don't need a world full of professional musicians.
No.
Can you imagine like all these professional trumpet players out there? But,
there's already too many.
Yeah. But the idea that you're making an impact on someone that is going to be with them as a musician, as a potential parent, as a community member, as a whatever they are in the world, like your music through impact, your impact through music is really something that's going to stay with them. And that's huge.
Yeah. And this idea of what we do, like with just art in general, like what we do is people who get to teach this, it's like what's going on in here and what's going on in here. It comes out, we get to, we talk about healing. Like that's one thing that we get to do. And I know like that's, one time that Theresa and I got to hang out was at the Conselmer, one of the Institute event that we had in Arizona this year. And, someone who did that for me was Dr. Tim Lotzenheiser. I was a grade 10 student, and he is someone who showed me how to get out my feelings through my instrument, just through a little high school competition clinic thing, but he changed my life in like 30 minutes. And I told him that this year, and he's like, oh, okay. I waited 30 some years to share this with him. And he's like, yeah, okay. But then we had to talk after, and it was better, but it was still like, oh, but yeah, those opportunities that we get are to get stuff out is amazing. And to show people that what they learn in the classroom with us, you don't have to be a freelance musician. You don't have to play in the Met. You don't have to, this will carry forward if you want to be a community musician, if you want to be a supporter of the arts.
Yes.
These are the people that we're kind of able to reach and have an impact on. So it's great.
Yeah. The other thing that really stuck out, and I know I'm going backwards a little bit, you were talking about like the student suggesting the crescendo. And I remember from like my early training as a music educator, and maybe it was just the way that I interpreted it, was like, you have to know the score and you have to know exactly how it's going to be interpreted, and you have to know exactly how you're going to do every little thing. And I remember thinking that as a young teacher that was my job. My job was to know exactly what I wanted and exactly how I was going to get it. And there were no questions asked.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until much later that I realized that, like, yeah, I should have all of that. But it's not just my opinion that matters. I can ask the students and we can get their opinions. And it's okay if they have a better idea than me.
Yeah.
You know?
It is. It's like, and that's been one, actually this might go off on to another path, but this idea of that, like, I think for us, yes, foundationally as conductors and as servant conductors, it's really important for everything I'm saying, not to be devoid of work. Like I have to do the work. I have to know the score. I have to have an idea of how I want it to go. But like you just said, it needs to be open to collaboration, because that's what we're teaching. We're teaching collaboration. We talked about relationships in the first question. We're teaching relationships. And that's what it is. It's about compromise. It's about that. It's about growth. So for me as a servant conductor, learning that I need to do the work is really important. And also this idea of being direct still exists in being a servant leader. If it's not, then it's like chaos. It's complete chaos. So I, if something's wrong, we already talked about it, but I say it, I need to say it with love, but still, it's still there. And this idea of excellence still exists within servant leadership, if not even stronger, because it goes beyond the product. That's what's great. I want everything to be excellent and every person to be excellent as a person. So that's been really a big part of it. And I think a big misconception about servant leadership, where it's like, you're a servant leader, you're a pushover. Well, no, you don't have to be. Because I think a big idea of it is like, well, you're asking what they want and you're doing what they want. Like, no, I'm involving them in the process. And as the teacher in the room, I would hope that I could, use another part of Greenleaf and persuade if I have to. I'm persuading, I'm not demanding, which is, I think, a really important thing to point out about Greenleaf's kind of characteristics. This idea of getting rid of the idea of, I can never say this word, and I wrote it 1,000 times, being an authoritarian. I swear I haven't been drinking, just espresso. But to be a bit of a dictator, those kind of things. So that's been an interesting path to go down. But I think it's where we can be the expert in the room, and we can also involve the other little experts that are in the room. Because if you talk to Jody Blackshaw, have you talked to her on this podcast?
We did, last season. She's wonderful.
So she's one of my favorite humans on the planet. Right? But Jody's someone who talks about being a constructivist in education. Which I think is great. I have some knowledge, so does this person, so does this person, so does this person, and how all of our collective knowledges ends up giving us an answer in some degree, or further down the path of discovery, which is a really beautiful way to think about it.
Yeah.
I know what I think about is when, you give your learners in the ensemble a chance to say something, it builds up, for them to say, oh, wow, that I had a great idea. Sometimes they don't see themselves as put in the work, creative, or see themselves as smart or the best or whatever. Just validating, like, let's try that idea. That's really valuable to our learners, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's see. Oh, go ahead, Kathryn.
Well, I was just going to say, so I feel like we talked a lot about the benefits for students. So maybe we should talk a little bit more about, like, what could listeners try tomorrow?
Well, I think some of what I mentioned in the previous question, certainly you can maybe implement. In the case of Rob Taylor, like, he did it in the night. The night I gave him the questions, one of them was, I think, how do your students think of your leadership style? So he sent out a Google form that night to his students. And, like, if his interview was one of my favorites, and that answer in particular about that question was good, because you should hear these glowing reviews he gets, and it's amazing. It's great to hear who he is as a leader and how his students view him. And I mean, like, genuine, like, they're not just trying to suck up to Dr. Taylor. Like, they actually, like, this man is amazing. He is so great. But he said, like, it's amazing to see all these things, but also you can look at what's not there, and you can say, oh, these are the things, you notice that maybe sympathy wasn't listed. Or maybe I need to be more of a sympathetic leader in what I'm doing, or those kind of things. So to hear, because that was something I never really thought about. Like when I get my course reviews, I'm like, oh, there's a stinker. Oh, there's a great one, but like what's not there, what's missing from my idea of what is a great servant educator or conductor. So I think that that's something that you can apply right away. It's been fun finding more servant leadership research and articles and things, and it comes from people you would never even think. Andrew Traxel, who's associate director of bands at the University of Northern Texas, which is a storied band program with Eugene Corporon and all those famous recordings. I never knew Andrew was a servant leader, but if you have he is he wrote a whole article on it that lives in the teaching performance through teaching band through performance books, those GIA books, which he's now the editor of, I believe. But he talks about the importance of what we can do is also serving, and this is classic, but it's true. Part of being a servant leader is also serving the music, and what in the intentions of the composer. And we have had those conversations and so many times, and it's part of kind of our conductor evolution in leadership. That was part of who we were at one point. You think about Fennell or Reynolds, they're Battisti, very focused on the composer and how we can serve them. So that's part of it. So that's something we can do, and that goes back to what we were talking about, Theresa, with knowing your score and things like that. Yeah. I think that's not to be. I just want to echo that that's not to be lost in all of this conversation. Those things, especially. Another thing that we didn't talk about is programming, and how you can ask your students about programming. I don't know all. I mean, I like to think one of the biggest band geeks, but my students dig things that I don't know about. So I want to hear what they're thinking. And most of the time it's like, can we do Mazlanka 4? I'm like, well, no, honey, no, we can't do that. Because I remember even with the Maroon and Gold band, I did this once, and it was like these giant pieces for the campus band. I'm like, dude, we're not gonna make it. No, Vesuvius is not happening. More like Red Balloon. Let's go. So, but anyway, but I joke about it. But those kind of questions to ask that you normally wouldn't ask for, I think is important to involve your students in. I think the feedback thing for me is kind of the biggest way that we can grow as leaders and help our students.
It's interesting you say to look at what's not there. I'm working right now with Dr. Sandy Stauffer at ASU, for some of my research, and she has said to me multiple times, the absence of data is data.
Yes.
Right. The absence of data, you have to look for what's not there as well. And that's a really good point. We don't often think about that when we get our like feedback forms or evaluations. We're like, yes, they liked all these things. What didn't they say? Yeah, that's interesting.
Oh, and I guess, and this is the hard part. Another thing you can start doing tomorrow is trying, if this is something you're interested in and becoming more of a servant. It doesn't have to have a label, like it's servant leadership, but finding like-minded people that, for me, I've just been incredibly blessed and lucky to have the educators that I've had who are now, colleagues, and I can talk to about these things, and they can give me honest feedback. I mean, there's like so much, which, sometimes I don't want to hear it. Because if I throw another program at someone and like, Dylan, come on, it's too but I need those people in my life. So for me, I try really hard, and I'm laughing in my head because I feel like, Theresa, you and I have talked about Midwest. I think the first time I went to Midwest was 2021, and I did not go as a servant leader. I went as someone who wanted to get a picture with Frank DeKelly. I wanted to be seen with this person, and I didn't know who my people were. This last year going to Midwest was completely different. I was surrounded by the people that I love and I admire, and I wanted to spend time with, and I wanted to learn from. So I think for me, that's something that I do regularly to improve myself as a leader in general. I don't have to put the servant word in front of it, but if really trying to find people who ring true to some of this thinking, I think is a vital part of what you can do tomorrow.
Yeah. We say that a lot. You got to find your person. I mean, that's kind of how Kathryn and I started doing all of this stuff, is just finding people who were thinking the same stuff. So I was, mentioning my research. My next question kind of comes from that. And, doing research now on this idea of student empowerment and realizing that that's like a big word that a lot of people think different things about.
Right.
And obviously you came here onto this podcast knowing that word was in the title. So you kind of had a feeling that something was involving that. But I guess, what does student empowerment mean to you when you think about music education?
That's a great question.
You define it. Is it a good question, or is it like a I have no idea question?
My palms are sweaty. No, it is a great question. It's something I think now, as large ensemble people, if that's who you are listening to this, like, that's who I am. I just live for band. I love it. I've always loved it. It's in question what we do, the efficiency of it. Does it needed? What does it do for students when they leave? Either at the high school, junior high, elementary, even at my level, like, what's that mean when they leave my university program? Because they're not all performance majors. They're not all educators, especially here. I have engineers in my ensemble. What's that mean for them? So for me, is first and foremost what I said before. Those are artists in front of me. They're students, sure, but they're artists. So, and that artistry has to live on past my time with them. So for me, empowerment means things I can do in my rehearsals to help them develop as not only little machines that can play in an ensemble, because that's, I think, what people think of. It's like a cog in a machine. Empowering them to be artists in the large ensemble format. Like, what can we do to teach them to be creative, to make choices, to have opinions that aren't agreeable to the person next to them, artistically, I'm saying, those kind of ideas. So for me, as a large ensemble person, I'm always thinking about empowerment and how maybe not giving my answer right away can help them, empower them to find their own and to find their own path. And trying to help, once that's kind of established for them, what can I do to further empower that path to help them get to where they need to go? So I think that's kind of what it is for me. I don't know if that was a great answer. It's so funny being on this end of the podcast, because I'm like, so many people say exactly what I'm saying to you. Like, oh, I don't know if that was a great answer. And I'm always like, why did they say that? And now I'm saying it. Anyway.
Well, hopefully we're empowering you to say exactly what you want to say.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I think in my current role as a large ensemble person, that's kind of what I want to do. I want to create artists, and not just artists that play in large ensembles.
Yeah. This has been really, really, so it's been nice for me to get to meet you and learn more about your work. And how can people connect with you and learn more about you?
Yeah, a couple different ways, some of which aren't even created yet. So I have a website that's connected to the band room, but if you put in the old www.dylanrookmaddix.com, that's with a DY, you can find stuff there. If you just want to go, it's much easier, bandroompod.com. That'll bring you to a lot of different things. You can learn about, not to plug my podcast on your podcast, but so you can hear all the episodes there, and you can learn about myself and Kate Nishimura, who I host that podcast with, who's a fantastic composer and one of my dearest friends. And then that, I think, also brings you to some of our resources and some things that I've written, not yet on servant leadership actually, but some other articles that I've written and things. A lot of stuff that Kate's been doing. And we have some other resources and things there for you. One is in partnership with Jody Blackshaw, actually, in her Colorful Music initiative. So there's a repertoire list there, which is connected to interviews with those composers. So it's a great kind of curriculum. Not a curriculum, but it's a tool that you can use when you're playing a piece. If you're playing Peace Dancer or something by Jody, you can listen to how that was created and why and all of those things from the mouth of the composer, which is cool, and some recommended stuff. And changing your pattern, and as well as on the Memorial School of Music website. That's the one that doesn't exist yet, but it will be there. So if you want to get a hold of me through Memorial University, that's another way to connect.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll make sure we have all those links in the notes. People can find you. All of your stuff is awesome. Of course, I really loved the changing your pattern, just because it spoke so much to all of this great work. So,
well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. We've spoken so much about podcasting, Theresa, and it's that we've never actually done anything. So I'm so glad to have the two of you, putting these conversations, much needed conversations, out into the world and making an impact for the greater good. So thank you so much for having me on this podcast and for all you're doing in the podcast land.
Of course. And thank you too. Thanks for your time and just, making all this great stuff happen. We really appreciate it. If you liked today's episode, you will love the PassTheBatonBook.com website, where you can find free resources, coaching services, and how to support Pass the Baton. Speaking of support, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Thanks again for listening.